In the late summer of 2025, Nepal entered one of the most turbulent chapters of its recent history. The country had long been restless, especially its younger generation. Unemployment, corruption, and the visible privilege of political families had left young Nepalis angry and disillusioned. On their phones and in conversations, they joked bitterly about Nepo kids, the sons and daughters of politicians who enjoyed wealth, opportunities, and flashy lifestyles, while ordinary youths struggled just to find a job or a future. Then came the spark. In early September, the government announced that 26 major social media platforms, including Facebook, Instagram, WhatsApp, YouTube, and X, would be banned. Officials claimed it was about regulation and compliance with new laws, but young people saw it differently, a blatant attempt to silence voices, censor criticism, and cut them off from the digital world that had become their lifeline. For Gen Z, this was not just about apps, it was about freedom, dignity, and being heard. On the morning of September 8th, crowds of young people gathered in Kathmandu's Mandala intersection. They carried placards, painted slogans, and shouted chants that echoed their anger, against corruption, against censorship, against the hypocrisy of leaders. Similar scenes unfolded across the nation, from Pokhara to Biratnagar, from Butwal to Itahari. The protests were meant to be peaceful, a public outcry against injustice. But as the day unfolded, the atmosphere grew darker. Police forces arrived in full gear. Water cannons swept across the streets, tear gas canisters hissed through the air, and then, most shocking of all, bullets were fired. By nightfall, dozens lay dead and hundreds were injured. Hospitals overflowed, and the country watched in horror as images of bleeding students and smoke-filled streets spread rapidly, even in the shadow of the ban. Instead of calming down, the movement surged. On September 9th, tens of thousands poured onto the streets again. Some marched peacefully, while others, fueled by grief and rage, turned to destruction. Government buildings were stormed. The parliament building burned. The homes of politicians were attacked. The Supreme Court was set ablaze. The anger was no longer only about social media, it was about years of corruption and betrayal. The political establishment trembled. Prime Minister KP Sharma Ali, facing the biggest revolt of his career, resigned. His government collapsed, and curfews were declared in Kathmandu and other major cities. Soldiers patrolled the streets, but the momentum of the protest had already swept past the state's control. The ban on social media was quickly lifted, yet the people were not satisfied. They wanted accountability, reform, and a future free from the grip of corrupt elites. In the days that followed, Nepal was a country in shock. The death toll rose to more than 70, with over 2,000 injured. Families mourned, survivors recounted stories of brutality, and the world's media turned its gaze toward Kathmandu. The violence left scars on buildings and homes. Yet amid the devastation, something happened. The same young protesters who had fought in the streets began to clean them. They picked up debris, painted over scorched walls, and swept away the ashes of conflict. It was a symbolic gesture. They were not destroyers, they were builders. An interim government was formed under Sushila Karki, a former chief justice respected for her integrity. She promised reforms, accountability, and free elections in early 2026. A national commission was set up to investigate the bloodshed. But even as the state tried to stabilize itself, many of the protesters remained wary. They had seen too many promises broken before. For Nepal's Gen Z, the protests were more than a political event, they were a generational awakening. It was the first time the nation's youngest citizens had risen with such force, demanding change not only with slogans but with their lives. It was a battle for dignity, for justice, and for a voice in a country where they had long felt ignored. And though the protests ended in blood and ashes, their spirit has not faded. Nepal now moves toward elections, but the young generation watches closely. They know the cost of silence, and they know their power. The story of the Gen Z protests is not just about the past weeks, it is about the beginning of a new chapter.